The grand clock in the hallway showed 4:30 in the morning when Elena pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the Vienna Music Academy. Her keys jingled softly as she stepped inside, her worn shoes making barely a sound on the polished marble floor. At 52 years old, she had been doing this same routine for 15 years now. Wake up at 3, catch the first bus at 3:45, transfer twice, and arrive at the academy before anyone else. The building was silent at this hour. That's how Elena liked it. No students rushing through the corridors. No teachers discussing complicated musical theories she pretended not to understand. Just her, the mop, the cleaning supplies, and the faint smell of wood polish that had become as familiar to her as breathing. She made her way to the supply closet on the second floor, pulling out her cart with the squeaky wheel that she kept meaning to fix but never did. Her hands were rough and calloused from years of scrubbing floors and wiping down surfaces. She wore the same gray uniform every day, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun that was starting to show streaks of silver. Most people at the academy didn't even know her name. To them, she was just the cleaning lady, the woman who emptied the trash bins and made sure the practice room smelled fresh, the invisible person who worked in the background while they focused on their important business of creating art and nurturing talent. Elena started her morning routine in the practice rooms on the third floor. She wiped down the piano benches, straightened the sheet music left scattered on stands, and picked up the forgotten water bottles and coffee cups that students always left behind. Through the walls, even at this early hour, she could sometimes hear a dedicated student practicing scales or working through a difficult passage. She would pause just for a moment, listening to the notes drift through the air before continuing with her work. By 7 in the morning, students began trickling in. They walked past her without a second glance, chatting with their friends about their upcoming recitals or complaining about their strict teachers. Elena kept her head down, pushing her cart from room to room. She had learned long ago that being invisible was safer, easier, less complicated. The main concert hall was always her last stop before the morning classes began. It was the jewel of the academy, with high ceilings painted with frescoes of famous composers, velvet curtains the color of deep wine, and crystal chandeliers that sparkled like frozen waterfalls. In the center of the stage sat the Academy's pride and joy, a magnificent grand piano that cost more than Elena would earn in 10 lifetimes. She approached it carefully, as she always did, with her special soft cloth reserved only for this instrument. She dusted each key gently, polished the glossy black surface until it gleamed, and made sure not a single fingerprint remained. This part of her job took the longest, but she never rushed it. There was something about this piano that demanded respect, even from someone like her. Her colleague, Joseph, an older man who handled the maintenance work, often found her here. "You spend too much time on that piano," he would joke. But Elena would just smile and continue her work. During lunch breaks, while other staff gathered in the break room, Elena took her simple sandwich to a small storage room on the ground floor. The walls were thin enough that she could hear students in the adjacent practice rooms. She would eat slowly, listening to them stumble through Chopin nocturnes or struggle with Beethoven sonatas. The afternoon shift was busier. The hallways filled with students changing classes and teachers having discussions. Elena navigated through them all like a ghost, her cart squeaking along, her eyes always down. On this particular evening, something different was happening. The academy was preparing for a special reception. Important donors were coming, people who gave large amounts of money to keep the school running. The staff had been preparing all week. Elena stayed late to make sure everything was perfect. She polished the floors until they shone like mirrors, arranged chairs, and made sure fresh flowers were in every vase. By the time guests started arriving at 7, she was exhausted but satisfied. The donors began filling the hall, dressed in expensive suits and elegant dresses that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. They held crystal glasses of champagne and spoke in the confident voices of people who had never worried about money. Their teenage children, students at the academy, clustered together in small groups, trying to look sophisticated beyond their years. Elena had planned to slip away once her work was done, but the event coordinator asked her to stay a bit longer in case anything needed to be cleaned or fixed. So she remained, trying to blend into the background near the maintenance door, hoping no one would notice her. She watched as the director of the academy gave a speech, thanking the donors for their generosity. She watched as some of the top students performed short pieces on the grand piano, receiving polite applause. She watched as wealthy parents bragged about their children's achievements, comparing practice hours and competition placements like they were sports statistics. And then she made a mistake. A small one, but enough. While trying to discreetly wipe a spilled drink near the piano, her cleaning cloth caught the attention of a man in an expensive suit. He was standing with a group of other donors, and she heard him make a comment to his friends. Something about the help being visible during their elegant evening. Elena quickly tried to move away, but the man's voice grew louder. He seemed amused by something, and his friends were laughing. She kept her head down, hoping to disappear back into invisibility, but she could feel eyes turning toward her. More people were looking now. The comfortable buzz of conversation was changing into something else. She clutched her cleaning cloth tighter and took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. The crowd seemed to be forming a circle, and she was somehow at the center of it. Her heart began to beat faster. This was attention she didn't want. This was exactly what she had spent 15 years trying to avoid. The man in the expensive suit was saying something else now, and people were laughing. Elena didn't look up to see his face, but she could hear the mockery in his voice, the casual cruelty of someone who had never known what it meant to be powerless. She wanted to run, to grab her coat and leave through the service entrance, to catch her buses home and forget this evening ever happened. But something was about to occur that would make running impossible, something that would change everything, not just for this one evening, but for the rest of her carefully constructed invisible life. Elena had built her entire existence around staying hidden. Every morning in her tiny apartment, she reminded herself of the rules. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't draw attention. Don't let anyone ask questions about her past. Her apartment was simple. One room with a small kitchen, a narrow bed, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. No photographs. No personal items. Just the basics. On rare days off, Elena would walk through the city, passing famous concert halls. Sometimes she would stand outside, listening to muffled music through the heavy doors. Then she would turn away, hands buried in her coat pockets. She had learned to live with the ache. At night, she would let her fingers move against the blanket, pressing invisible keys, playing pieces she hadn't performed in decades. But only at night, when no one could see. Working at the music academy was both torture and comfort. She was surrounded by what she loved most, but only as an observer. Yet she could still be close to music without the danger of being visible. Now, standing in the grand hall with all these people looking at her, Elena felt her careful walls beginning to crack. Her throat felt tight. Her hands were shaking, but life doesn't work that way. Sometimes invisibility fails. Sometimes the past catches up. And sometimes a single moment can force you to become visible again, whether you're ready or not. The man in the expensive suit was named Victor. He owned 3 banks and had a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Right now, that smile was fixed on Elena as he waved his champagne glass in her direction. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor's voice boomed across the hall. I think we're all missing an opportunity here. The conversations around the room began to quiet down. People turned to see what was happening. Elena felt her stomach drop. She took another step backward, but Victor was already moving toward her. And the crowd was following his lead like he was some kind of Pied Piper. This woman, Victor continued, gesturing at Elena with his free hand, has been cleaning this beautiful academy for how long? 15 years, 20? He didn't wait for an answer. And I'll bet she's never once sat at that magnificent piano. Never once touched those keys except to dust them. A few people chuckled. Elena's face burned. She clutched her cleaning cloth so tightly her knuckles turned white. Victor's daughter, a girl of about 17 named Claudia, stepped forward from the group of students. She wore a designer dress and had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Father's right, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who thought they were being clever. It seems almost cruel, doesn't it? To work around all this beauty and never participate in it. More people were gathering now. The circle around Elena was growing tighter. She could see the director of the academy standing near the back, looking uncomfortable but not saying anything. He wouldn't risk offending his biggest donors, not for someone like her. I think, Victor said, taking a long sip of his champagne, that we should give this hard-working woman a treat. Let her sit at the piano. Let her play us something. Even a simple children's song would be charming, don't you think? The crowd murmured in agreement. Some people were smiling, already enjoying the entertainment they thought was coming. They were expecting to see Elena fumble through Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, or maybe hit a few random keys and not know what to do. It would be amusing. Something to talk about over dinner later. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," Elena managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Her accent, which she usually kept hidden, came through stronger now. "I should just finish my work and go home." "Nonsense." Victor spread his arms wide like he was being generous. "We insist. Consider it our thank you for all your years of service. Surely you've picked up something from listening to all these talented students, yes?" Claudia clapped her hands together. "Yes, please. I want to hear what the cleaning lady can do," she said. Cleaning lady, the way someone might say. Street performer or circus act, like Elena was there for their amusement. Elena looked around desperately for an escape route, but there was none. People had moved closer, forming a wall of expensive suits and designer dresses. Some were already pulling out their phones. The director was still standing there doing nothing. "Please," Elena tried again. "I really should not." But Victor was already taking her elbow, not roughly but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away. "Don't be modest," he said, steering her toward the piano. "Everyone deserves their moment in the spotlight." The crowd parted as Victor led Elena to the grand piano. The instrument gleamed under the chandelier lights, looking even more imposing than usual. Elena had cleaned this piano 1,000 times, but she had never sat at the bench. Not once in 15 years. Victor pulled out the bench with a flourish. "There you go. Have a seat." Elena stood frozen. Her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was wrong. This was dangerous. This was everything she had spent 15 years trying to avoid. If she sat down and played the way she knew how, everything would unravel. But if she refused, the scene would get worse. Victor would make it worse. He was the type who didn't like being told no, especially in front of an audience. Slowly, with legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, Elena sat down on the piano bench. The familiar shape of it sent a jolt through her body. It had been so long, that's it. Victor clapped, stepping back to give her space but staying close enough to maintain control of the situation. "Now what will you play for us? Do you know Mary Had a Little Lamb?" The crowd laughed. Someone in the back shouted, "Maybe she knows hot cross buns." More laughter. Elena's hands hovered over the keys. They were shaking so badly she wondered if anyone could see. She could feel sweat forming on her forehead despite the cool air in the hall. Every instinct screamed at her to stand up, to run, to get as far away from this piano as possible. But then something shifted inside her. Maybe it was the years of being invisible finally catching up. Maybe it was the cruelty in Victor's smile or the mockery in his daughter's eyes. Maybe it was just exhaustion from carrying the weight of her secret for so long. Or maybe, after all these years of silence, the music inside her simply refused to stay quiet anymore. Elena took a deep breath. She let her fingers rest on the keys, feeling the cool ivory beneath her calloused skin. The keys felt like old friends. The room had gone completely quiet. Everyone was watching, waiting for the embarrassing spectacle to begin. Victor stood with his arms crossed, that smug smile still on his face. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment. In that darkness, she wasn't a cleaning woman anymore. She was someone she used to be, someone she thought she'd left behind forever. When she opened her eyes, everything had changed. Her hands moved to the keys, no longer shaking. They were steady. Sure. And then she began to play. But she didn't play Mary Had a Little Lamb. She didn't play Hot, Cross Buns, or Twinkle Twinkle. Little Star, or any simple children's song, Elena's. Fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 burst into the hall like a thunderstorm, powerful and overwhelming and absolutely breathtaking. The transformation was instant and complete. The hunched, timid cleaning woman disappeared. In her place sat someone else entirely. Her back straightened, her head lifted. The notes cascaded through the hall, each one perfect. The difficult passages that made professional pianists sweat came from her fingers like breathing. The delicate moments were so beautiful they seemed to hang in the air. The powerful crescendo shook the chandeliers. Victor's smile vanished. His champagne glass hung forgotten in his hand. His daughter's mouth fell open. All around the room, people stood frozen in shock. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. Cleaning ladies didn't play like this. Nobody played like this. This was the kind of playing you heard from masters, from legends, from names that filled concert halls around the world. But it was happening. Elena's hands danced across the keys, pulling from the instrument sounds that most pianists could only dream of creating. She played like someone who had spent their entire life with music, who understood it in a way that went beyond technique or training. She played like the piano was speaking through her, telling a story that words could never capture. The piece demanded everything from the performer. It required technical brilliance, physical endurance, emotional depth, and perfect timing. It was one of the most challenging pieces ever written for piano. Students at the academy practiced for years just to attempt it, and most never mastered it. Elena played it like she had written it herself. Like the notes were her own thoughts made audible. Like breathing. The hall was absolutely silent except for the music. No one moved. No one spoke. Some people had tears running down their faces without even realizing it. Others stood with their hands pressed to their chests, overwhelmed by what they were hearing. And Elena played on. Lost now in the music, her eyes closed again. Her whole being focused on the conversation she was having with the piano. A conversation she had missed so much it physically hurt. A conversation she thought she would never have again. The final notes of the Rachmaninoff piece hung in the air like a question waiting for an answer. Elena's hands slowly lifted from the keys and came to rest in her lap. For a long moment, she just sat there, breathing hard, her eyes still closed. The silence in the hall was absolute. Not a single person moved. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone began to clap. Slowly at first, just one pair of hands. Then another joined in. And another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted into thunderous applause. People were on their feet, some with tears streaming down their faces. Others stood with their hands over their mouths, looking like they had just witnessed something impossible. The music students who had been so confident earlier now looked small and humbled. Several of the teachers were crying openly, not even trying to hide it. Elena opened her eyes and looked down at her hands. They were trembling again, but for a different reason now. She had just done the one thing she had sworn never to do. She had revealed herself. After 15 years of hiding, of being invisible, of pretending to be someone she wasn't, she had thrown it all away in a matter of minutes. Victor stood frozen about 10 feet from the piano. His champagne glass had slipped from his fingers and lay shattered on the floor. His face had gone pale. The smug smile was completely gone. His daughter Claudia was crying. She was crying the way someone cries when they realize they have done something terrible. Her expensive makeup was running down her cheeks. The director of the academy pushed his way through the crowd, moving toward the stage with his mouth hanging open. "That was," he started to say, then stopped. He seemed unable to find the words. "That was extraordinary. That was beyond extraordinary. I have never, in 40 years of running this academy, heard anyone play like that." Elena stood up from the piano bench slowly, her legs still shaky. She wanted to run. Every instinct told her to grab her coat and get out of there as fast as possible. But her body wouldn't cooperate. It was like the music had drained every bit of energy from her. An elderly man emerged from the crowd walking with a cane. He was at least 80 years old, with white hair and kind eyes that were filled with tears. Elena felt her heart skip a beat when she saw him. Professor Wilhelm. He was the founder of the academy, retired for many years now. "I know you," Professor Wilhelm said softly as he reached the stage. His voice was shaking. "I know who you are." The crowd pressed closer. Elena felt trapped again, but this was different from before. "You are Elena Volkova," Professor Wilhelm continued, his voice growing stronger. "The child prodigy from Moscow. You won the Tchaikovsky competition in 1992. I was there. I was one of the judges. You were 19 years old and you played like an angel." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. People started whispering, pulling out their phones to search for the name. "I remember the newspapers," one of the older teachers said from the crowd. "You disappeared right after the competition. Everyone thought something terrible had happened to you. There were rumors, but no one knew the truth." Elena stood silently, her arms wrapped around herself. She felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the performance. Her secret, the one she had protected so carefully for so long, was unraveling right in front of everyone. Professor Wilhelm took another step closer. "You gave it all up," he said quietly. "Your career, your future, everything. Why, what happened?" Elena's throat felt tight. She hadn't spoken about this in 30 years, hadn't even let herself think about it most days. But standing here now with all these people looking at her, with the piano still warm behind her, she felt something break loose inside. "My husband," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was a journalist. He wrote about things the government didn't like. After I won the competition, we thought we were safe. We thought my success would protect us." She paused, swallowing hard. "We were wrong." The hall had gone completely silent again. Even the people in the back stopped whispering. "They killed him," Elena continued, her voice flat now, emptied of emotion by years of grief. "Shot him in the street like he was nothing, and they made it clear that if I didn't disappear, if I kept performing, if I stayed visible, my daughter would be next." She was only 5 years old. Several people in the crowd gasped. Claudia was crying harder now, her hands covering her face. Victor looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "So I ran," Elena said. "I took my daughter and I ran. We came to Austria with nothing. No money, no papers that were worth anything, no one to help us. I changed my name. I took whatever work I could find. And I never ever touched a piano in public, because that was the one thing that could give me away. That was the one thing that could lead them to us." Professor Wilhelm was crying openly now. "Your daughter?" he asked gently. "Where is she now?" For the first time since she started speaking, a small smile touched Elena's lips. "She is safe. She is a doctor in Canada. She has a good life. She has children of her own. She never knew about any of this. I never told her who I used to be. She thinks her mother was always just a cleaning woman." "But the sacrifice," one of the teachers said from the crowd, "to give up such a gift, to never play again for 30 years. Elena shook her head. "It was not a sacrifice. It was a choice. And I would make it again in a heartbeat. My daughter's life was worth more than any career, any fame, any music. She was worth everything." The silence that followed these words was different from before. It was heavy with respect, with understanding, with the weight of what Elena had endured. Victor finally found his voice. "I am so sorry," he said, and for once there was no arrogance in his tone. "What I did, what we did to you tonight, forcing you to play, mocking you. I had no idea. I am deeply, deeply ashamed." He walked toward the stage and did something that shocked everyone. He got down on his knees in front of Elena. "Please forgive me," he said. "I was cruel and stupid, and I judged you without knowing anything about you. I thought because you cleaned floors that you were somehow less than us. I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong." Claudia ran forward, falling to her knees beside her father. "I'm sorry too," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. You sacrificed everything for love, and I treated you like you were nothing. I'm horrible. I'm awful." Elena looked down at them. These people who had humiliated her just 30 minutes ago. She could have let them suffer. She could have walked away and let them live with their guilt, but she had lived with enough pain in her life. She didn't need to create more. "Stand up," she said quietly. "Both of you. There is no need for this." Victor looked up at her, his eyes red. "How can you forgive us?" Elena helped him to his feet, then reached down to help Claudia as well. "Because holding on to anger takes energy," she said simply. "And I have spent enough years carrying heavy things. I don't need to carry that too." The crowd was watching this exchange in absolute silence. Some were crying. Others looked like they were reevaluating their entire lives. The director of the academy stepped forward again. "Miss Volkova," he said formally, "I would be honored, truly honored, if you would consider joining our faculty as a piano professor. With full salary, benefits, and apartment if you need it. We would be blessed to have someone of your caliber teaching here." Elena smiled sadly and shook her head. "Thank you, but no. I don't want that life anymore." The news spread like wildfire. By the next morning, Elena's story was everywhere. It started with a video someone had recorded on their phone. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. By evening, it was international news. "Lost piano genius found working as cleaner," read one headline. Elena's face was suddenly on television screens across Europe and beyond. The footage of her playing Rachmaninoff was being analyzed by music experts. Elena stayed home for 3 days, not answering her door, not checking her phone. She sat in her small apartment looking out at the brick wall, trying to process what had happened. Her carefully built life of invisibility was gone. On the 4th day, there was a knock that didn't stop. Finally, Elena opened the door. Professor Wilhelm stood there looking concerned. "May I come in?" he asked gently. Elena hesitated, then stepped aside. The professor walked slowly into her tiny apartment, looking around at the bare walls, the simple furniture, the complete absence of anything personal. His eyes were sad. "You have been living like this for 30 years?" he asked quietly. Elena shrugged. "It was enough. I had a roof over my head, food to eat. My daughter was safe. That was all that mattered." Professor Wilhelm sat down in the single chair, leaving Elena to sit on the edge of her bed. "The world wants to hear you play again," he said. "Concert halls are calling. Record companies are offering contracts. Everyone wants a piece of the miracle." "I don't want any of that," Elena said firmly. "I know," the professor said, "but the story is out there now. The question is how you will face it on your own terms." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "What do you mean?" "I mean you have power now," Professor Wilhelm said. "Real power. The kind that comes from a story that touches people's hearts. You can use that power however you wish. You can hide from it, yes, but you can also shape it. Make it mean something." Elena stood up and walked to her small window. Outside, she could see reporters waiting to catch a glimpse of her. "I don't know how to do that." "Then let me help you," the professor said. "One concert, just one. You choose what you play. You choose where the money goes. Then if you want to disappear again, you can." Elena thought about her daughter in Canada, who had called crying after seeing the news. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" she had sobbed. "All those years I thought you were just a cleaning lady. I was sometimes embarrassed to tell my friends what you did. And all along you were this amazing person who gave up everything for me." That conversation had broken something open in Elena. Not in a bad way, but like a dam finally releasing water it had held back too long. Maybe the professor was right. Maybe she needed to close this chapter properly instead of just letting it haunt her forever. "One concert," she said finally, "but I have conditions." "Name them," Professor Wilhelm said. "All the money goes to help refugee families. People who had to run like I did. People who gave up everything to keep their children safe." "Done," the professor said immediately. "And I choose the venue. Not some fancy concert hall, somewhere that means something." "Where?" Elena turned to face him. "The academy. Where it all came out. That's where it should happen." The professor smiled. "Perfect." Over the next 3 months, preparations began. This was different. This was hers. She returned to work at the academy despite protests from everyone. "I made a commitment," she told the director. But something had changed. Now when she walked through the halls, students stopped to watch her with awe. Teachers greeted her with respect. Victor the banker came to see her one afternoon while she was cleaning one of the practice rooms. He looked nervous, holding his expensive hat in his hands like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "I wanted to show you something," he said, pulling out his phone. He showed her photos of a music school being built in a poor neighborhood across the city. "I'm funding it," he said. "Free lessons for any child who wants to learn, regardless of whether they can pay. I'm calling it the Elena Volkova School of Music." Elena stared at the photos. "You don't need to do this." "Yes, I do," Victor said firmly. "You taught me something that night. You taught me that worth has nothing to do with job titles or bank accounts. That night, the most important person in that room was wearing a cleaning uniform. I was the small one. I want to do better. I want to be better." His daughter Claudia had undergone her own transformation. She had quit her piano lessons at the academy, admitting she had no real passion for it. Instead, she started volunteering at a refugee center, helping new arrivals navigate their new country. When Elena ran into her there one day, Claudia hugged her and whispered, "Thank you for showing me what courage really looks like." The days passed quickly. Elena began practicing again, really practicing several hours each day. Her hands, roughened by years of cleaning, slowly remembered their old strength. The calluses that had come from scrubbing floors began to give way to the different kind of calluses that came from piano keys. She chose her program carefully. Rachmaninoff, of course, the piece that had revealed her. But also Chopin, whose music spoke of longing and homeland. Prokofiev, fierce and Russian and full of the complicated feelings she had about the country she had fled. And at the end, something she had never performed publicly before. A piece. She had composed herself during those long years of silence. She had written it in her head, during those early morning bus rides to work, during lunch breaks in the storage room, during sleepless nights when memories of her old life kept her awake. She had never written it down because she never thought she would play it, but now she did, painstakingly transcribing from memory onto sheet music, each note a piece of her hidden life finally being given voice. She called it The Price of Safety, and when she played it for Professor Wilhelm during a practice session, the old man wept. "It's beautiful," he said. "Heartbreaking and beautiful. It sounds like goodbye and hello at the same time." "That's because it is," Elena said simply. The night of the concert arrived. The Academy's main hall had been transformed. Every seat was filled, with hundreds more people standing in the aisles and watching from the doorways. News cameras lined the back wall, but Elena had insisted on one thing: no live streaming, no recordings for sale. This moment belonged to the people in this room, and to them alone. Backstage, Elena stood in front of a mirror, hardly recognizing herself. She wore a simple black dress borrowed from one of the teachers. Her hair was pulled back the same way she always wore it for work. She had refused makeup, refused all the fussing that people wanted to do. "I am not performing as the girl I used to be," she had told them. "I am performing as the woman I am now." Professor Wilhelm appeared at her side. "Are you ready?" Elena took a deep breath. She thought about her daughter, who was in the audience with her own children. She thought about Victor and Claudia, who had become unlikely friends. She thought about Joseph and the other cleaning staff who had saved seats in the front row. She thought about all the refugees whose lives might be changed by the money this concert would raise. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." The lights dimmed. The crowd fell silent. Elena walked onto the stage, and for the first time in 30 years, she walked as herself. Not as a cleaning lady, not as a woman in hiding, just as Elena, with all her scars and all her strength. She sat at the piano, the same one she had cleaned 1,000 times. She placed her hands on the keys, and then she began to play. The first notes filled the hall like water filling an empty vessel. Elena played the Rachmaninoff again, the piece that had started everything. But this time it was different. This time she was playing because she chose to. The audience sat in absolute stillness. Her daughter was in the third row, crying quietly, her own children beside her. They were seeing their grandmother as someone extraordinary, someone who had sacrificed everything so their mother could live. Elena moved through the Rachmaninoff with complete control. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, but she raised her hand gently, asking for quiet. There was more to come. The Chopin Nocturne came next. It spoke of longing, of homesickness, of beautiful things lost and remembered. Elena had chosen this piece because it reminded her of the girl she used to be. Then came the Prokofiev, fierce and complicated, just like her feelings about Russia. She loved the country of her birth, but she also feared it, hated what it had taken from her. The Prokofiev held all of that, and she played it with everything she had. By now, people in the audience were openly weeping. This wasn't just a concert. This was a woman's life being told through music. Finally, Elena paused. She looked out at the crowd. She thought about speaking but decided against it. The music would speak for itself. She began to play her own composition. The Price of Safety. It started quietly, like a lullaby. This was about her daughter as a baby, about promising to keep her safe. The melody was simple and sweet. Then the music changed. It grew darker, more urgent. This was the danger, the moment when safety shattered. The notes tumbled over each other like running footsteps, like panic. People in the audience held their breath. The music shifted again. Now it was resignation mixed with determination, the sound of a door closing on one life so another could open. The lullaby came back, but transformed, older, sadder, yet somehow stronger. This was the choice being made. This was love in its purest form. What came next was the years of invisibility. The music was sparse and repetitive, like the same day happening over and over. But hidden within were tiny moments of beauty. A sunrise through a bus window, the sound of students practicing. life finding meaning even in the smallest moments. Then slowly the music began to build. The lullaby returned, joined by other voices, other themes. This was the discovery, the revelation. The music swelled until it filled every corner of the hall. And finally, the ending. Elena brought everything back to that simple lullaby, but now it had survived everything and come out the other side. It was peaceful, but not sad. It was acceptance. It was a mother watching her child grow up safe and happy and thinking, yes, it was worth it. The final note hung in the air. Then silence. Complete silence. Elena lifted her hands from the keys. She didn't look at the audience. She just sat there, feeling empty and full at the same time. The applause started slowly, but this time people weren't just clapping because the playing was brilliant. They were clapping because they had witnessed something true, something human. People stood. The entire audience rose to their feet. Elena's daughter stood up, tears streaming down her face. Victor was standing too, his face red from crying. Claudia was beside him, sobbing. Professor Wilhelm was in the front row, clapping with shaking hands. Elena stood and took a bow. Just one. She walked off the stage quickly, leaving the audience still clapping. Backstage, her daughter was waiting. They held each other without speaking. Elena's grandchildren joined the embrace, and for a moment they were just a family. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," her daughter whispered. "Not because of the piano, because you loved me that much." Elena looked at her daughter's face. "I would do it again, 1,000 times over." The weeks that followed were strange. The concert had raised an enormous amount of money for refugee families. Elena made sure every penny went where it was supposed to go, working with organizations that helped people who had fled violence and persecution. She visited the families sometimes quietly, without cameras or fanfare. She listened to their stories and told them hers, and in those moments she felt more connected to humanity than she ever had on stage. The media wanted more from her, of course. They wanted interviews and documentaries and another concert. But Elena was done performing. She had said what she needed to say. She had closed the chapter like Professor Wilhelm suggested, but she didn't go back to complete invisibility either. She found a middle path, a way to be herself without hiding but also without being consumed by fame. She started teaching piano 3 days a week at Victor's new music school in the poor neighborhood. She taught children who came from families, like hers had been, families who had lost everything and were trying to rebuild. She taught them music, but more importantly, she taught them that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story, that sometimes the things we lose make space for new things to grow. On Sundays, she played at a community center near her apartment. Just an hour or two, old favorites and new pieces for whoever wanted to listen. Sometimes 20 people came, sometimes just 5. It didn't matter. She played for them with the same intensity she had brought to that big concert, because she had learned that every audience deserves your best, whether it's 5 people or 500. She kept her small apartment with the view of the brick wall. She still took the bus, though now she could afford a car. She still lived simply, though money was no longer a problem. Some people couldn't understand it. Why didn't she want more? Why didn't she take advantage of her fame? But Elena understood something they didn't. She had already had everything and lost it. She had already been famous and given it up. She had learned that the things that really matter, the things that actually make life worth living, aren't the big flashy moments. They're the small ones, the quiet ones, the moments when a child learns their first scale, when a refugee family smiles because someone sees them as human, when you wake up in the morning and know that the people you love are safe. 1 year after the concert, Elena was cleaning the practice rooms at the academy again. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The director had tried to stop her, but she insisted. "This is who I am," she told him. "I'm not just a pianist. I'm someone who takes care of things, someone who values all kinds of work." A young student found her there one afternoon polishing the windows. The girl looked confused. "Miss Volkova, why are you cleaning? You're famous. You're incredible. You shouldn't have to do this." Elena smiled and kept polishing. Should and shouldn't are interesting words, she said. I clean because it keeps me grounded. Because it reminds me that no work is beneath anyone. Because the person who cleans this room is just as important as the person who plays the piano in it. Maybe more important. Because without clean spaces, beautiful music has nowhere to live. The girl thought about that for a moment. Can I help you? Elena handed her a cloth. Of course.